Okay, it's Sunday, so it's time to answer some questions and play some fighting games. We're doing Street Fighter today. We're playing Ryu because two reasons. One, better fundamentals. Two, you gain levels when you play characters, and you gain money when you level up a character. Naturally, it takes longer to level up the higher the level is, so I've been cycling through the characters that I have less time on so I can get more money so I can buy Poison, the character I actually want to play. So, first up, if A, the pandemic is not happening, and B, travel expenses aren't an issue, which countries/places would you want to visit and why? I would like to go back to the UK, because it's where I'm from, and it's, you know, you miss the place you're born in, strangely enough. The UK has a very different vibe to Canada, and by extension the US, and I would like to go back. I would also like to visit Japan. I would like to visit, it's Osaka, right? That Sotenbori's based on in Yakuza? I'm pretty sure it's Osaka. And then the, you do the usual, the Yakuza highlights, pretty much. Because, look, Yakuza 0 is the best game ever made. What can I say? Next up, any interest in playing Judgment on the Let's Play channel? Yes, but I kind of need it to come out on PC first. Also, there's still all the other Yakuza games first. So, but yes. So, now, next up. How do I improve consistency? So, is the, we can give the easy answer. Play the game more often, and then we can clock out for lunch early, having done our due diligence and answered the question. In reality, though, so the biggest problem you're gonna have in terms of maintaining consistency is just going into autopilot, because that's where you're gonna make the most mistakes. How you will avoid going into autopilot is entirely based on you as a person. Me, I have to perform basically entirely just like performance actions for my own benefit that somehow help me focus. Which, I slump down in the chair. Alright, we gotta sit up in the chair now, basically, I go, shoulders rise, gotta lower the shoulders, like relax, but also be at attention. I just have to do things like that, performative actions on my part that somehow help me focus. What works for you will vary greatly from person to person, but ultimately you're trying to avoid going into autopilot as much as you possibly can. One common piece of advice I have seen is that people will set up some kind of thing that will make a repetitive noise, and then they use that repetitive noise to help them focus, pretty much. So you'll set up like a metronome, the metronome will tone, and then you will go through your checks, basically, at that point. Are my teammates dead? What are my abilities doing? Is somebody behind me? If I'm playing a game with a mini-map, I check the mini-map, Oh, not so much for Overwatch, but if you're playing like a MOBA or an FPS or something that does have a mini-map, you check it, So you hear the tone, and then you gotta go through the checklist, and then ideally you don't need to keep using it for the rest of time, but it helps people focus, at least while they're learning. But that's what you're trying to do. Next up, first time watching the Owl. How are teams running 2 off healers? So first off, they're better than us, which basically means that they don't take as much as just, like, stupid damage as you and me do. We're out there getting clapped on the cheek for absolutely no reason. Basically just because we want to be doing something. They're less prone to doing things like that. But also, like, here's the thing. You and me, we play Rhine, and we play Zarya. Or we play Rhine, and we play Roadhog. We do not run other compositions. If we do, it's under extreme duress. And we're being realistic. It's just one guy didn't want to pick Reinhardt, so he picked a Reinhardt-adjacent character that's more fun to play than Reinhardt is. But we play those tanks. That's what we do. We play Ryan and we play Zarya. These compositions require more brute force healing than the comps that Overwatch League teams are likely to run. For example, if you're running Hammond as your main tank, Hammond requires very little in the way of actual personal healing to get by, you know? If you're playing Reinhardt, you kinda need a main healer or you're gonna die the second you start fighting. Whereas someone like Hammond, less so. Same deal with somebody like Winston, who is more in and out. You're not spending so much time in a prolonged exchange, which requires more healing to keep you up. So, those are the basic reasons for you. They're better than us, and they run team comps that don't necessarily require a main healer, or two main healers, in the case of, like, a lot of ladder. There's also a matter of efficiency that comes into it, because ladder you're likely to run two main healers just because it's easier to do, but if you're trying to optimize, two main healers is less good because they tend to starve each other of ult charge, because they're both outputting a lot of healing. You also end up losing a lot of the utility that the off healers bring, because the main healers, they bring healing, but they don't tend to bring quite as much in the way of utility. For me, the exception is, of course, Ana, which Biogrenade is, of course, fantastic utility. But if we're talking, like, over the main healers, broadly speaking, then they don't do as much as the off healers for utility. Moira does not even come close to matching the utility of Lucio, Zen, or Bridget. Baptiste has the lamp and his powerful knees, but outside of that, you know, not so much, so it tends to still get beaten. You also don't end up having a defensive ultimate if you run two main healers, or, like, a main healer and Mercy, say, which is also sort of a big deal, because there are many situations in the game where if you do not have a defensive ultimate, you are fucked. And having the defensive ultimate does not necessarily win you the fight, but it can give you a chance where you would otherwise have no chance, which is the main thing, really. Because if you get caught in the graviton and you don't have a defensive ultimate, well, we're gonna do a lot of praying in the near future is basically what happens. But there you go. Next up, what's a good hero pool? This was specifically somebody that plays all roles and wants to be able to play the sub-roles for each role as well. So, you need to play more for that, obviously. If you just want to play one role, then you should endeavor to play as many people in that role as you possibly can. You will not play all of them, because nobody is wired that way, really, where you're, like, equally skilled at all of the characters. You know, there are just going to be some characters that you're just not good at, and that's just how it is. So, you know, there will always be some, but if you do only play one role, you should endeavor to play as many people in that role as you realistically can. This is, of course, also based on how much free time you have. If you don't have that much free time, like, one main, one off for whatever you're doing is fine. If you do have more time, you know, two of each, pretty much. If you want to play all roles, and you want to be able to play all sub-roles within them, well, this is, of course, a heavy time commitment, as far as it goes, because the thing is with Overwatch is there is not that much skill crossover between the characters in the game. Because even between heroes that, like, look really adjacent to each other, like Ashe and Widow, there's some crossover, but, like, they're still really different heroes. So you still end up needing to learn a lot. And then if you go between roles, not just heroes, you go from healer to DPS, there's even less carryover. The most carryover you get is probably Baptiste to, like, Soldier. And even then, they're still really different. So if you want to play all roles and all sub-roles, you gotta invest a lot of time. because you gotta, like, I can play a lot of heroes. I can play a few heroes well. We're trying to aim for, we can play a lot of heroes well here. Most realistically, just pick one main, one off from all the roles, learn them, and then go out from there. Try to learn the one that is the most broadly applicable in each. So, tank, you learn Reinhardt because he's the most broadly applicable, and also probably isn't highly contested. Then you learn the off tank, you do Zarya, because Zarya, most broadly applicable. And then just between those two, you are almost certainly fine, because you will, if you know how to play both of them, you'll never be in a situation where you can't pick a good hero, pretty much, because you've learned the two best heroes. They pick Roadhog, I can play Reinhardt, it's fine. They pick Reinhardt, great, I can pick Zarya. They pick, Toes, well, I could do either or, depending on, like, what I think for the game, right? And then you do that for healer as well, so Ana or Baptiste doesn't really matter, most broadly applicable, they fit in the most circumstances. Off healer, Lucio, pretty much, fits in almost every team composition. And then again, you're covered. Other guy picks an off healer, I know how to pick Ana, or I can play Ana or Baptiste. They pick one of them, I can pick Lucio, or I could pick Ana and Baptiste if I have to. Anyway, because they might be bad, right? DPS doesn't divide as cleanly as tank and healer do, because there isn't really DPS and off DPS. There's just kind of DPS. I'd like to divide it, if I'm gonna just be, like, reductive, I go straight damage DPS, so Widowmaker being the main example of that, almost no utility, purely damage. And then utility DPS, so Mei, pretty low damage output, high utility. So just one from both of those categories will kind of cover you. There's overlap in here as well, because it's not as clean. Like, McCree could easily be put in either category, right? So, McCree's a good one. Just there, right? Otherwise, there's a couple ways you could divide it. You could do consistent DPS and flanker. You could just do hit scan and projectile. There's a few ways you could divide it. Whichever one you prefer, just kind of go with that one, But I would go high DPS and then high utility as the two. So McCree and just go with Mei. Just say Mei. They're both, like, pretty broadly applicable. There's no team composition in which McCree is bad. And Mei, while not necessarily ideal, also fits in a lot of circumstances anyway. But, like, there's a huge range in DPS, You might just be terrible at hit scan DPS, in which case, well, you're just picking two projectile DPS at that point, right? So you'd go more like, Pharah and Junkrat, or like Hanzo and Junkrat, right? Yeah, so whichever way you want to divide it. And then you try and go out from there if you want to continue expanding your pool after that. Because we're talking about learning 6 heroes already. That's kind of a lot of heroes, considering that there's not much overlap between them. So then you just keep going out from there, and just try to go in, like, priority of most important, or, like, most broadly applicable. So, like, after you've done one of each, I would say do another main out of the 2, right? So you do another main healer and another main tank, and then whichever DPS, again, from that point. And then you do another of the off, because you're more likely to be in a position where you need to play a main healer tank versus an off healer tank. So prioritize that category over the off. Also, even in situations where the other person picks a main tank or a main healer, you can still pick another main tank and main healer, and it's okay, even if it's not optimal. Whereas if they pick another off tank or an off healer, and you only know how to play an off tank or an off healer, now you're playing a bad team composition. So prioritize the main over the off. Both on like the first set of heroes and then after that as well, because it's just the one you're more likely to get use out of learning. And then just keep going out from there, you know. And it's going to take you a lot of time. It's going to be really hard, but hey, if you want to do it, you know, more power to you. So, next up, what's your most helpful or obscure key binding setting? Pharah, Concussive Blast on right click. Tracer, Pulse Bomb on left shift. Because no one uses right click to use their booster for Pharah, so it should be Concussive Blast. And Tracer, if you have Pulse Bomb on shift instead of Q, it's slightly easier to maintain movement while using your ultimate. There you go. Next up, how do I get over ranked anxiety? You force yourself to do it until you get less afraid of doing it. This is how anxiety is in general, as someone who has anxiety. You force yourself to do something and you realize it's not as bad, but the initial forcing yourself to do it is very hard. I have experienced this many times in life. It has been terrible every time, but it has become less terrible after the initial forcing myself to do it. For example, I'm very afraid of heights, and also am an anxious person in general. I hugely enjoy rock climbing. The first rock climbing experience I ever had was awful, and I did hate it. But after that first experience, it got a lot better, and I massively enjoy that now. There's not a lot of that going on anymore. In fact, it's probably of all the hobbies I used to have, that's probably the one I miss the most. It was just a very enjoyable hobby. If you ever have the opportunity to try rock climbing, I would highly encourage it, even if you are afraid of heights. It will be scary, and you will have to force yourself into doing it, but I enjoyed that a lot. That was a very good time. But I had to force myself into doing that. What else did I have to force myself into doing? I was in the Army Cadets. I had to force myself into doing that as well. That was terrible, but was also a fulfilling experience I would also recommend. Of course, clearly not for everybody. But I enjoyed it personally. I had to force myself to do that. What else did I do? I learned how to do martial arts. I learned karate, as everyone does. And I learned also some Tai Chi. I got to a brown belt in karate, and I didn't get very far into Tai Chi, because Tai Chi is not really much of a martial art. It's more of a meditation experience. I know it's classified as a martial art. I don't care. But it has no application at all as far as fighting people goes. But, you know, I had to force myself into doing that, but it was worth it. I enjoyed it in the end anyway. So, like, you know. And then with video games, I also had ranked anxiety, and I just had to force myself into doing it. This is just the way you deal with anxiety, unfortunately, is you have to force yourself to do something you really don't want to do. But after you've forced yourself into doing it a couple times, you start to enjoy it. Because you realize it wasn't as scary as you thought it would be. Because that's what anxiety does, right? It's like, oh god, it's going to be terrible, I'm going to make a fool of myself, it's going to be absolutely horrible, and you do it, and you're like, oh, it wasn't actually that bad. So that's just how you get over it. You just have to force yourself to do it, unfortunately. Currently, I'm forcing myself to learn how to program in Unity. Because I want to make video games. I've had this video game idea in my head for a while now that I've been thinking about, which is a turn-based strategy game like XCOM. With the focus being on synergy between your various hero characters. And the main way I envision that working is that you have tiered status effects that your characters work together to activate. So, for example, just one I have already I thought of, is that there is a slow status effect and a cripple status effect. Slow reduces your order in initiative, whereas cripple reduces the amount of tiles you can move. If you slow somebody and then you cripple them as well, or vice versa, this status effect increases to break, which has the same effect as the other two, while also now just being like, you can't move until somebody heals you. And then the key part to that is you can't really activate any of these special status effects off of one character alone. You need to use multiple characters. With a few exceptions, because otherwise it could end up where you're like with one character left in a fight and you're pretty much fucked. And then various other things, like another one I have is a guy who can change a material to another. So he could change an ally to metal. They can't move now, but they function as cover. And you could have a strong ally push the metal character forward, so as a projectile, basically just bowl them forwards. And then the guy can end the magic effect to turn them back into normal. So you get to do this initial hit, and then they got to cover all this distance at 0 risk because they were currently metal. You can't do anything while you're metal also, of course. So anyway, I have this whole thing thought out. And I've been thinking about it a lot. If you want to see something, you gotta make it yourself. So I'm trying to force myself how to learn how to use Unity. It's terrible, and I hate it, but hopefully it'll get better. So anyway, that's how you get over ranked anxiety. You force yourself to do it, and eventually it's not scary anymore. So, next up. What is the point of playing Winston? So the thing with Winston is that Winston is really good. He is like a laser-focused piece of character design, where he is really good at the thing he is designed to do. But he does not fill other areas well at all. So you're picking Winston for a pretty specific reason, which is you're running a dive comp or you're countering specific heroes. And if you're running a dive comp, you're probably better off playing Hammond, but that's besides the point. So you pick Winston to counter characters like long range, hit scan, DPS, the snipers, Genji, flankers in general, like so Doomfist, fucking Doomfist. But you pick him for like those specific reasons. He doesn't fill other roles well, right? Like he's a main tank, but you cannot just pick Winston with any team composition because he just doesn't synergize with that many people. He's someone you pick more in relation to the enemy team than your own team. Now, he does synergize with people. He synergizes well with D.Va, but not to the extent you get with, like, Rein Zarya. Winston's somebody you pick more to counter than to synergize with your own team. And he is really good at the thing that he does, but he does not do things he isn't designed to do well at all, which puts him at like a distinctly C-tier hero as far as I'm concerned, right? Where they really shine in a few situations, but they do not fill other situations well. Whereas somebody like an S-tier hero is somebody that is applicable in a fuck ton of situations, right? Like, Reinhardt is like an A-tier hero because he is applicable in so many situations compared to Winston. Zarya is like an S-tier champion because she fits a ton of situations, arguably more than Reinhardt does, and she is really fucking good in all of those situations, right? All the situations Zarya is good in, she is really good in. Zarya is like a S-tier hero. So Winston is like a C-tier hero. He is really good at the things he is designed to do, and terrible at everything else. So that's the point of playing Winston, though. You pick him to counter, and you pick him because you're running a dive comp, and you can't pick Hammond because you're not good at Hammond, or the other guy picked Hammond, and you don't want to play D.Va. Anyway, there you go. Next up, do I know what DPS I should pick? Pretty much it's like whoever you like. There's like two ways to actually approach this, right? Which do I learn how to play? And then also, how do I know who I should pick in a game? We'll talk about both. Whichever one you want to learn, just learn that hero. Don't worry about like their competitive viability or something. You can do well with basically every hero in the game, so don't let that worry you. Especially in lower ranks where you're like learning how to play the hero, you'll be fine with whatever hero. So just pick the ones that you are most drawn to, and learn how to play them. And if you find out you don't like them actually in practice, then whatever, just pick a different hero that gels more with you. And, you know, pick them for whatever reason you want, right? Like, you can pick them because they, like, your gameplay appeals to you, or just because you like how they look. Like, do whatever the fuck you want. This is advice you get with, like, fighting games and MOBAs as well. Like, just pick whichever one you want to play, because, like, tier list stuff doesn't matter until you get to higher ranks anyway. So you might as well just pick the one you want, or the one that you like the most. Because the thing is, like, if people tell you, I'll just pick this hero because they're really good, like, the problem is, it doesn't matter if they're a high-tier hero if you're learning how to play them, because they won't be a high-tier hero for you, because you're learning how to play them. And the thing is, as well, is that you might hate them. Like, you'll lose with them regardless, even if they're a high-tier hero. This is especially true if you're learning how to play a MOBA or a fighting game. You will lose regardless of that character's tier list position, because like MOBAs and fighting games require a large amount of knowledge to get anywhere at all, really. So even if you pick a triple S tier hero, it won't matter, because you will just get clapped like I get clapped all the time. And the same is true with MOBAs. You'll get clapped regardless. So the thing is, if you pick a high-tier hero, you're gonna get clapped, and you might hate the character. So you're in a position then when you're not winning, and you're also playing a hero you don't like, which is the worst possible circumstance. So just pick the character that you like, for whatever reason. You like their gameplay, you like a certain move they have, you like one of their costumes, you just like their design. Whatever, pick whoever the fuck you want. As for who do I pick, which DPS do I pick in the game, pick like a generically good character at the start of the round that just synergizes well with your team, because you can't do anything about the enemy team until you've seen it. So you pick a character that plays well with your team and is like not super likely to get countered, right? So like, Bastion could synergize well with your team, but like, he can get pretty fucking countered by a lot of characters, so probably don't just pick Bastion out the gate unless you're feeling really spicy. Just pick a generically good character that plays well with your team. And then when you see the enemy team, you can adapt more from there. They're playing a lot of snipers. Maybe I should try and play a flanker now, or another sniper, so I can contest them a little easier. They got a lot of flankers. Alright, I should play somebody who's got crowd control so I can help peel for my backline. So I'll pick like a McCree or a May because they've got crowd control. And that's like really it. Like, it's not super complicated, really. I guess I should talk about synergizing with your team more. So, like, if you're playing a dive comp, you don't really want to pick a slow character, right? Like, if you're playing with a dive comp, you don't really want to pick Mei, because it's going to be hard to keep up, right? And Mei does, like, you don't necessarily need to pick somebody that dives to play well with a dive comp. Like, Widow plays well with a dive comp, despite not being a diver. Because she's just good at picking people off or setting people up to get picked off. The divers will also be more likely to force people out of cover and thus into Widowmaker's line of sight. So Widow plays well with the dive comp despite not being a diver. But like Mei doesn't have that same benefit. She's just slow and isn't good at long range. She is okay, but it's not where she excels, right? So if you're playing a dive comp, you want to play a diver or like a long-range hero like a Widowmaker or an Ashe or a Hanzo are also fine. Whereas if you're playing like a turtle comp, you don't want to pick a diver because you're really just kind of turtling it out with your teammates. So you pick like a soldier, a McCree, or a Mei. You know, you sit and you turtle it out. Sometimes you'll be in, like, an edge case situation where, like, both your healers have picked off healers, in which case, you know healing is going to be really low in the game now, because they're running, like, Lucio Bridget or something, Lucio Zamp. So you might be more inclined now to pick a character that has a self-heal. So, Soldier or, like, Mei. You know, just somebody that can heal themselves. Or somebody that, like, plays around health kits more. So, like, Sombra or one of the flankers in general, right? Somebody that just isn't as dependent on being healed by the supports. Or you might note that both your tanks are playing off tanks, in which case you don't want to pick a character that really needs, like, a front line to protect them. Don't pick Bastion in this situation. My man needs some tanks. Instead, pick a character that's a little bit more long range, so you're not so bothered that there's no shield in front of you because you can just play sightlines more. Or like a flanker, or because they're just more independent in general. They don't play around shields regardless, so you can just don't have to worry about it so much. So, you know, in those situations, you gotta play a little bit more, like, not so much that you're synergizing with your team, but more that you're accounting for the obvious weakness that your team comp has. You can't fill that hole yourself from the DPS slot, but you can help mitigate its effect as much as possible. And that's about it. That's all I really got for you on that one. And then next up, and this is the last question for this week, is Overwatch as toxic as it used to be? To be honest, no, it's not. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a wretched hive of scum and villainy, but it's not as bad as it used to be. I think it used to be, like, not even that long ago, like a year ago, it used to be, hands down, the most toxic game in the world. Even more so than, like, League of Legends or fighting games, broadly, as a category. It was incredible, the amount of toxicity present. Now, it still has it, obviously, but it's not as bad as it used to be. I think you can now debate that it's not the worst, right? Like, I think you could at this point argue that, like, League of Legends is worse again. Or at least as bad. Whereas I think it used to have it beat easily that Overwatch was worse. I couldn't really tell you exactly why. My main theory would be that toxic people are more prone to frustration, and if they are perpetually frustrated by the game they are playing, they are eventually going to stop playing it. As well as over time, only the more hardcore players are left behind, and they are, depending on your perspective, less likely to be toxic, though you could easily argue that they're more likely to be toxic as well. I tend to err on hardcore players generally being less toxic. Though, obviously, still prone to, like, elitism, but this is, you know, debatable point, I acknowledge. So that would be my main theory. But also just, like, I think if you're a toxic person in general, you're just not super likely to stick with a game for a large amount of time. And it's just that, like, Overwatch has a lower player base than it used to, as all games do, given enough time. So, like, it's just more likely that they filtered out over time, because they were never that committed to the game to begin with. I feel like toxic players are more likely in general to be drawn to, like, the flavor of the month game. So, basically I'm saying most toxic players are under the age of 16, and I will die on that hill. But yeah, I think generally it is less toxic than it used to be. Granted, that also could be colored by the fact that I don't play as much as I used to. So I'm just not exposed to it as much as I used to be. It's possible either way. But I think, yeah, it is less toxic than it used to be. It's at least as toxic as League of Legends now, rather than easily being worse. Like, easily being worse is what it used to be. That's all I really have for that one, and we're almost at the end of this game. It looks like I got it. Manat has to come in pretty hard now, and I can just, like, turtle out. Yeah, there you go, no problem. I remember these games quite vividly. I played a full set of 3 games against this person. They were extremely arduous and trying because they all of them almost went to timeout. Because she was just super passive, and I'm not good enough to just, like, muscle through a zoner. So there you go. So thank you very much for watching. If you did, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'm happy to answer. If you have any questions you'd like to see answered on the show, please communicate it with your preferred method. Comment, email, Discord, ESP, smoke signals, whichever you want. I started streaming on Twitch Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 8 p.m. EST to 11 EST. There's a link to the channel in the description, and if you managed to make it all the way through the video and somehow still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content and link quality in the future, and I hope you found the video helpful.